Magic is a power that is formed through human faith. People who continue to believe in magicians are called lanterns. The sky becomes brighter when the lanterns are lit. At such times, people's faith becomes much stronger. However, in a world where trains run fueled by coal and money has long since replaced magic, many people stop forgetting about real miracles. Against all odds, this man remained one of the most powerful fire mages. That is to say, some of the ordinary people continued to still believe in him. And the moment he saw her for the first time, he felt that she was actually his fire. Charlotte de Parole is a heroine with a very unenviable fate. Despite the fact that the girl was born in a noble family, she was still deprived of a luxurious life. All the misfortunes occurred because of her trashy father. He was such a spoiled individual that none of the nobles even wanted to reckon with him. The man was getting older, and there were fewer and fewer unspoiled women left in the city. Her grandfather Count couldn't do anything about his son, who was actually incapable of growing into a decent man. So her father quickly arranged for his grief-stricken son to marry the daughter of a baron from a neighboring kingdom. However, the new wife, who had hoped for the love of her spouse, very quickly learned misfortune. As you might have guessed, she discovered her husband under the skirt of a maid on their first wedding night. People expected a terrible scandal, but the man swore that such a thing would never happen again. Soon, he was the first to end the relationship. Supergu claimed that his wife was traumatizing his fragile soul with her obsession. After that, he came up with more ridiculous claims to get rid of the annoying girl. Charlotte was born in the midst of this horror. Her so-called father turned out to be a monster. He regretted having a child. The mother took out her anger by beating Charlotte. Only her grandfather, Count Parole, was inclined to the girl. At last, the time had come. Soon, the unfortunate girl's nickname would fall. Now her grandfather was free. The servant told Miss Charlotte that it was time to say goodbye. At least Count Parole had left something that would make his granddaughter happy. The girl was grateful to her grandfather. The excited guests waited for the maid to read the will. Miss Charlotte noticed her mother's defiant attire. This woman always behaved strangely, which made it difficult for the protagonist to perceive her as a full parent. In the will, it was written that by the end of his life, the Earl had chosen several heirs to his estates. The maid wanted to read who would become the next Count Parole, but the son of the deceased suddenly burst into the room. The man was very concerned that the papers were being read without the main heir. The indignant people shouted at the man to leave the place. He had only brought ruin to the deceased. Suddenly, the father spotted his own daughter among the crowd of angry faces. Heading towards the child, the man said that she had become very much more beautiful in the past few years. The Count's heir touched the girl's face and said that now he would be able to give her away for a higher price. The maid asked the arriving gentleman if she should continue reading the will. The Count's intentions became clear when he deprived his son of his money and title. He bluntly told his offspring that if he did not change, he would not have a good life. But instead of regrets, Albert continued to shamelessly amuse himself and spend the rest of his savings. Now the Count's son thought it was all over and he could get his father's money. The maid announced that the person who would take over the legacy of the Count's family would be his granddaughter, Charlotte Parole. From now on, she is Countess Charlotte Brabant de Parole. Albert was outraged that an unmarried thing was becoming a countess. He argued that she had to at least have one child to get the title. The laws of the family were created to prevent discord inside and outside the dynasty. Charlotte had told her father that this rule had no longer been in effect for the past 5 years. Of course, Albert, who had no interest in his family's affairs, was extremely surprised by this news. The maid told the furious gentleman that the will had not yet been finalized. Charlotte may have gotten a title, but there was no money in it yet. The maid continued to read out the will, which stated that if the Earl's daughter-in-law did not wish to live with her husband, she would be given permission to return home. If that wasn't enough, a doctor would be required to attend to her mental health. Also, all monetary savings, 150,000 acres of land to be exact, 45 million in gold, as well as all privileges in the city, are transferred to the daughter of the late Earl's son. A 21-year-old girl suddenly became the owner of the entire priceless heritage of the Parole family. In a fit of rage, Albert was about to attack his daughter, but those present warded him off from the girl. The man continued to shout that he was to become a count and receive all of his father's inheritance. The guests reminded Albert that he had been kicked out of the nobility long ago because of his immoral transgressions. His name wasn't even in the family tree. Charlotte slapped her father across the face to bring him to his senses. This commoner had to remember that he wasn't socializing with an ordinary girl, but a real countess. The man, like a kettle, continued to boil with anger. He couldn't believe that his father could betray him so easily. Albert was born to a mother who was predicted by all doctors to be infertile. Nevertheless, life must be paid for with life. Therefore, the countess left this world a couple of months after the birth of her son Albert. The count took pity on the child and independently engaged in his upbringing. For the sake of his heir, the man tried not to notice the absence of his wife. The young man was not at all guilty of the fact that because of his beauty with him, constantly fiddled with strange women. People even called him the incarnation of Apollo. It seemed that the girls themselves wanted to run after him. They had chosen their own fate. If Albert had any sin, it was that he never turned down the female sex. His father didn't even try to understand him. It was much easier for the count to disown his only child. The angry father thought back to his daughter's words. Everyone in this family was turned against him. Albert thought that he had always been tolerable to his daughter, so she had no right to kick him out of the house. A drunken man yelled for another mug of beer to be brought to him. The employee asked if he had any money. Albert was indignant, as he hadn't even gotten drunk yet. They tried to explain to the man that he had accumulated a lot of debts lately, which would have to be paid sooner or later. The employee tried to be courteous only because Albert was the son of the late Count Parole, but the drunkard was not going to be satisfied. He said that if he didn't want to do it the hard way, he would have to do it the hard way. Sometime later, after Albert had gotten drunk, a man came in. The bouncer picked up the intoxicated Albert by the scruff of the neck. Hans complained that his acquaintance kept hiding in the nooks and crannies like some intimidated garbage rat. The agitated Albert began to ask the strangers for help, after which he was immediately lowered to the floor. The man was even afraid that he might be killed at this point. Hans told the drunkard that he could leave this world only after paying his debt. The extortionist continued to irritably ask about where the money he was promised to bring today was, especially since Albert said that he would pay for absolutely everything, even for betting on interest. True, that was back when Albert thought he would be able to get his hands on the inheritance after his father's death. The man was sure that if his mother were alive, she would surely protect her child from an abusive parent. Somehow, Albert felt that this woman would surely be able to understand him. The man thought about the fact that if the birth father was unwilling to help, perhaps the daughter would come to her senses and lend a helping hand. Hans told Albert that there was no need to be afraid, for there were other ways to make money. For example, they could take out a couple of extra organs and sell them. Surely the man wouldn't mind the operation if he had any conscience left. Albert, realizing that he was on a hair's breadth of death, began to threaten his extortionist with the title. The womanizer was born into a noble family, so he thinks he is a gentleman. No wonder he never managed to get used to reality. In other people's eyes, he was absolutely nothing. Albert de Parole continued to persistently remind him that he came from a noble family. However, at the moment, the man was an ordinary commoner because he had been deprived of his title not so long ago. The former nobleman did not understand how Hans had such information. The extortionist smiled smugly. Hans hated people who used other people's money as their own. He was ready to kill people who forgot about karma and started begging for mercy. Albert begged pitifully to be left alone. The only way the womanizer could save his skin was to repay his debt. Suddenly, a wonderful idea appeared in the man's mind. He declared that he would definitely pay back the entire debt. In the will, it is written that everything passes to his daughter, but it is not necessary to specify Charlotte. Albert also had a second daughter, Cara Gale. There is not a single person who would dare to laugh at that name. A 19-year-old girl became one of the strongest mercenaries. The average height of women is 157 centimeters, but she has a whole 175 centimeters in her. At a small age, Cara was orphaned and fell in with the mercenaries. She was a tall, skinny kid. For such a girl, the taunts and harassment were enough to turn her from an ordinary child into a vicious creature. Cara believed that people who were used to waiting for something were fools. At a young age, she had learned the world and stopped waiting for luck. The mercenary was ready to attack whoever dared to harm her. The others could only say something behind her back. And even then, she destroyed everyone in her path. That's how 10 years of her life went by. A female mercenary's job is usually to escort noble ladies to some event. Since girls are scarce in such circles, Kara was in demand. The mercenary obviously liked getting paid a decent wage and riding with the ladies in carriages. However, she wanted to do something more interesting, something that would show others who she really was. The girl thought about how she should have given up those boring tasks after all. One of the workers told Kara that there was a new visitor waiting for her in room 6. The mercenary didn't understand what kind of visitor she was talking about. It was not uncommon for the girl to be visited by those who wished to become mercenaries, or just to see her work. Kara speculated that the new client might have been another waste of time. The employee agreed, but it was very difficult for him to deal with this person on his own, especially since it wasn't an order, but a request for a personal meeting. The girl was very surprised, for she had no family or friends. The mercenary was sure that if she wasted her time, she would definitely not hold back. Stepping inside, the girl saw a man and a woman. Kara witnessed something that wasn't normally done in public. She wished she could replace her eyes with ones that had never seen this disgusting sight. The woman told the girl that she should have knocked before entering. She thought that by such actions, Kara was showing how low her background was. The mercenary was finally able to recognize her mother. The woman said that fate was full of hardships. Those who are too greedy meet with failure, while those who are able to control themselves usually live happily ever after. The mother told her young daughter that there were many children fighting in hell in an attempt to raise their noble status. But the woman said that she could take care of her child. However, the mother soon abandoned her child after the girl's grandfather stopped supporting her financially. If she didn't need Kara, the woman should have given her child to an orphanage or charity organization where people could take care of her. Instead, however, the girl was abandoned near a crowd of mercenaries. Contact with countless threats from wild and cold people led to the development of a nasty temper. Kara told her mother that she was in no position to exchange pleasantries with her. If any mercenary saw a smile on Kara's face, they would immediately run away. They knew that that facial expression indicated the most genuine anger. Unfortunately, Kara's mother didn't know that. In the woman's opinion, a girl should be happy if her parents came to visit. The mercenary had stated to her mother that she was not the kind of person one would want to see in one's daily life. There were countless grudges, and they needed to be settled before the conversation. Kara wasn't surprised that her mother was being so obnoxious, so the girl turned her attention to the other person. She asked who the pale and sickly man was. Albert got angry, because before he had only heard compliments about how angelic he looked, especially not easy to have such fair skin. The man decided that he had to get this girl to help him achieve his goals. First, it was necessary to break Kara's will. Albert began to shout about the fact that he is her father. Moreover, in his opinion, the girl should have been taught a lesson for such rude behavior. The mercenary was angry, because he abandoned her immediately after there was no child support. Her mother had at least taken care of Kara for the first 10 years, and her father's face was nowhere to be seen. Albert had no right to yell at his abandoned daughter. Apparently, the man didn't realize the situation. When the mercenary woman approached, the father felt flustered, for she was taller than him by at least half a head. Albert wondered how he could not lose his dignity in front of his own child. The girl stepped on her father's foot. The startled man started grabbing his foot, jumping around the room. Kara thought it was funny how dramatic the mild-mannered man was beginning to get. The man was once again yelling about how he was the sole heir to the Count of Parole, Albert de Parole. The father tried to intimidate his daughter with his fictitious noble status. The girl said that the title he flaunted would in no way protect him from being struck down. It was unlikely that the magic power would protect him in any way, even if he was the son of an earl. Albert mumbled something to the mercenary about serving 10 years for beating up a nobleman. However, he wouldn't be able to stop Kara with threats. The girl could rip her father's head off right now and then run away to another country with her. This mercenary was even scarier than Hans. However, Albert was unlikely to find someone else to make the deal. His plan was simple. He wanted it so that his foolish daughter, who grew up as a commoner, would take the inheritance and then bring back her father's fortune. That's why Albert was in the business of finding his daughters. When he was young, he accepted paternity over many children. However, in order to receive child support, the children had to give up the right to inherit. The Count's son could not believe that his father had turned out to be so devious. However, there was one child who managed to escape the rules: Kara. Her mother had abandoned her to the mercenaries while she was still young. Since the girl was not registered in the civil registry, she had no way to waive her right to inherit. The girl indifferently asked her parents what they wanted from her. It was only at that moment that Albert realized that even if his daughter received the inheritance, it was unlikely that she would want to blindly give it to him. Kara suggested that her father might have come to apologize after all that had been done. The girl said that if that was the case, she would judge depending on their reflections. Life these days was vapid. Nevertheless, the girl would surely find out who had made her so. The mother confessed that Count Parole was dead, but that Albert could not receive the inheritance. The dead man had said he would give everything to his son's daughter, and so Kara could also be entitled to the inheritance. Albert felt that Marianne had been too hasty in revealing the information. He should have considered the fact that she couldn't keep her mouth shut. He needed Kara for the inheritance, but her mother had told her that her father wouldn't be able to get a dime anyway. Marianne tried to gain personal gain at the expense of giving out all the details to Kara. The girl was surprised that such a bunch of trash had approached her for their own gain. Albert argued that it wouldn't be a useless item. As long as they had Kara's identity card, she had every right to Count Parole's magnificent inheritance. In return, the girl only had to give up a small portion of the fortune. It seemed ridiculous to the mercenary because, in essence, Albert had taken everything from her and said absolutely nothing about the fortune. The man tried to justify himself by saying that he would not be capable of such a thing because he, as a man of honor, has at least some conscience. The girl told her father that it was his problem that he could not make a will on his own. If he had done everything for himself, he should have solved the problems on his own. The man said it was his daughter Charlotte's fault. She must have done something to the Count before he died. For some reason, those words made the mercenary think. The father grabbed his daughter's hand and went on to say that his own children could not do such a thing to him. Albert said that Charlotte stabbed him in the back while he was treating her well. He couldn't live looking at his happiness after what she did to him. Therefore, her father wanted revenge. It seemed cruel to the mercenary that her father treated his daughter well and she stabbed him in the back. This Count Parole must have really adored his granddaughter if he left her the entire inheritance. As the girl listened to this man, it seemed as if he really loved Charlotte. No matter how beautifully Albert presented it, however, she lived like a beggar, and a little girl of the same blood grew up in love. It really pissed the girl off. The mercenary girl pushed her father and said that she would give him her help after all. But her parents did not even suspect that her plans did not include sharing money with anyone. After the death of Count Parole, Charlotte, who had just turned 21 years old, became a countess. The nobles expressed surprise, but all their worries were meaningless. The girl perfectly coped with her new duties. Charlotte said to call the treasurer and order him to check all the expenses for the last 5 years. The girl also told the Roland family to get her mother. The marriage was null and void as her husband had lost his noble title. Therefore, if she had the desire, she could find a new spouse and enter into a marriage alliance with him. The girl had no intention of changing her servants, however. She wanted to recruit more maids for her convenience. Her clear instructions quickly stabilized the affairs of the house. Charlotte kicked her abusive mother back out to her parents, setting aside a decent amount of alimony for them. Also kicked out were all the rats who had been quietly stealing the Earl's money. The butler told the lady that she had visitors. As it turned out, Sir Albert had come to the manor. Charlotte thought that this man was not worth introducing because he was just a commoner. The Countess said to send him home as she saw no point in seeing him anymore. However, the butler continued to insist that the girl should see her father. The girl bluntly asked Albert for what purpose he had come to see her. The man was indignant that his daughter began to address him on the first name. Albert did not want to swear much, as he had his own trump cards for an emergency. The father stated that he was here to collect his share of the inheritance. In Charlotte's opinion, his mouth was saying something ridiculous. The girl told her parent that for years now he had been cut out of the family tree. The man should have shut his mouth and not made a pathetic laughingstock of himself. Albert knew his daughter would say that, so he brought someone to help. Not wanting to listen, the girl told her father to get kicked out. The man asked Charlotte if she would allow the people who were some kind of stumbling block to this will to be let in. At the Countess's orders, Kara and her mother entered the room. The mercenary felt very uncomfortable in her dress. Suddenly, Charlotte felt a strange feeling. She began to feel cowardly. Albert had claimed his daughter, who was coincidentally Charlotte's half-sister. In fact, she might have been the one mentioned in the late Earl's will. It became clear why Hubert's voice was shaking so much. The servants were waiting for orders to dispose of the uninvited guests. Charlotte thought that all her relatives had been accommodated. Albert spoke proudly of the fact that he had managed to see off the late Earl, for Kara's birth had been registered. Therefore, the man believed that he was fully entitled to a share of the inheritance. Albert waited for the result of the DNA test. It was only necessary to give blood in order to find out whether Kara was his own daughter or not. The man smiled smugly. The mercenary watched her half-sister closely. It was hard to believe that Albert cared for her. Charlotte asked about her dear sister's name. The overjoyed concubine introduced herself. The butler showed Miss Kara to her room. The servants couldn't understand why the Countess didn't want to get rid of her half-sister. It would have been much more convenient to quietly eliminate the girl. Charlotte was sure that her father had time to rant about how he would receive his inheritance. The servants agreed that it would be odd if the hypothetical heiress suddenly disappeared. Upon closer inspection, the maid said that the documents provided were forgeries. The mistress of the house confirmed this. Countess was certain that a man with a pile of debts would not be able to afford such a test, especially since it wasn't like her father at all. The servants continued to be angry at the naked womanizer. Apparently, he really had no conscience if he thought of using mistress as a backup. Therefore, it was necessary to do everything legally in order that Albert did not do any more trouble. The protagonist hired Madame Grace to take charge of the case. Sir Mundane wasn't sure if Kara would return if she was sent away right away. It would be better to watch and find a way to stop her. Even though Albert was a piece of shit, that girl still came to the mansion to claim some of her inheritance. The servants were puzzled, for they didn't know how they should properly deal with Kara. Charlotte asked Hubert to take care of Kara, as it would take them quite some time to solve this problem. It seemed to the mercenary that even the birds on the estate were singing in a completely different way. It was difficult for the girl to get out of bed, for it was very soft. Kara was used to getting up early for training, but this was the first time she had slept for so long. The maid was startled when she noticed her guest was awake. The mercenary said that such a morning greeting cheered her up quite nicely. The maid asked Kara if she had kept quiet and pretended to be angry on purpose. It didn't seem to bother the mercenary at all. However, the maid was annoyed that the girl addressed her informally, even though they were both commoners. The maid wondered if it was normal for the guest to have such a manner of speech, even though she was part nobility. However, her kinship with the Parole family was still worth confirming. From the expression on the maid's face, it was clear what she was thinking. It looked like she had come here to report the breakfast. The maid asked the girl if she was really going to wear yesterday's dress. Kara resembled a barbarian very much with her decisions and behaviors. Earlier, Albert also resented the fact that the girl was going to wear pants to meet the Countess. He was so outraged by this decision that he even bought a new dress for his daughter. The maid told the guest that there was no way she would allow her to wear the new dress. However, the mercenary had no other dresses with her. The maid assumed that Kara had brought only one dress to annoy her mistress with her behavior. Of course, it was difficult for a girl who wore pants in her daily life to understand such a strange claim. Since Countess Charlotte was very slender, none of her dresses would fit Kara. The mercenary was so tall that the maid's clothes wouldn't even fit her. Kara freaked out because she was actually taking her clothes with her. The girl said all she needed for her comfort was a shirt and pants. The maid got angry after the clothes were thrown at her, for she was not going to be a hanger-on for an ill-mannered girl. The other servants looked at the stranger in surprise. They weren't sure if they should greet the girl or not, especially since they had never met her before. The servant girl kept yelling at Kara about washing her face and tying back her hair. The mercenary reacted calmly, for she didn't care that her appearance might look bad to someone. The girl asked to be shown to the dining room, for if she continued to talk pointlessly, she would probably get very angry. The mercenary decided not to expect the maid. Suddenly, Kara noticed Charlotte de Parole in front of her. The mercenary immediately noticed the visual differences between the two. Kara complained to the maid as she continued to mumble and would not tell her where the dining room was in the manor. The maid began to make excuses, for that wasn't really the case. Not wanting to deal with unnecessary problems, Charlotte ordered the carriage to follow her and the maids to take the breakfast to the room. The mercenary was surprised at how beautiful the Countess's chambers were. A guest's room is just a guest's room, and everything of value is in here. Kara was beginning to feel distinctly uncomfortable. The nobles don't come down for breakfast. Instead, the food is brought to the rooms. Aristocrats seemed very strange to the mercenary. The mercenary didn't understand very many of the rules. Charlotte also added that since she was the head of the Parole family, she should be treated accordingly. Kara was disdainful of the nobles' rules, so Charlotte tried to ignore her rude behavior. The mercenary didn't care about table etiquette at all. However, the Countess enjoyed watching her half-sister enjoy a delicious meal. Charlotte assumed that her parents weren't strict with her at all if she behaved so carefree. The Countess's mother kept yelling at the girl not to act like a commoner and to watch her posture. No man would wish for a woman with a pretty face if she looked completely unpresentable. The woman whipped her daughter mercilessly with a rod. Charlotte was not allowed to eat more than 2 pieces, for her figure was a weapon. The girl was the trophy of the House of Parole. Otherwise, her mother would not have needed her. Kara asked the Countess if she was all right, for she had hardly touched the food served. Charlotte said to ignore her appetite. The mercenary asked the Countess if she would allow her to finish her portion. The girl indifferently gave her assent. Charlotte wondered how her mother would react if she stuffed herself with food like that. Too bad she had never dared to do something like that before. It seemed to Kara that her interlocutor was offended. The mercenary noticed the soiled napkin. Apparently, the maid thought she could hurt her guest with such an act. The girl indifferently tossed the dirty napkin aside. Compared to those free mercenaries, the maid's mischief hurt her like a mosquito bite. But that was only the beginning of her revenge. The maid began leaving Kara's water kettles empty, or deliberately skipping sheet changes, or even spoiling her bed with rotten food. Kara thought the maid should be taught a lesson or two before it was too late. However, the mercenary immediately dismissed the thought, remembering that the girl was just an ordinary child with a capricious temper. But if you ignore the little bickering, then Kara's stay in the Parole mansion turned out to be simply excellent. Every day, the girl was fed elite food, and a soft bed was at her complete disposal. All of this was possible thanks to her gracious hostess, Charlotte. During this time, the mercenary had learned that the Countess never left her estate, whether she had any business to attend to or not. Aside from short walks in the garden, she mostly stayed in her chambers. And unlike Kara, she only ate to keep from starving. Kara also noticed some oddities in the servants. Almost all of the servants walked with a light gait, and their arms were covered with scars that could only come from real fighting. None of them tried to hide their past from outsiders like Kara. The mercenary had seen many different servants, but in the Countess's house it was completely different. Kara wanted to know who all these people were. But above all, she wanted to understand where the deep emptiness in Charlotte's eyes came from. It was strange, because people who received such a huge inheritance usually felt happier and more cheerful. Also, the mercenary speculated that the depressed look could be a side effect in people born into very wealthy families. Lillian Grace came to the Kara. She was the legal advisor to House Parole. Mage Lang from the Enchanted Tower was also here. He had been invited to finish the job because there were some things missing from the documents Albert had provided, especially the paternity test. In fact, Kara's mother had declared her daughter dead and given her a new name. It was very difficult for the Countess's legal assistants to investigate the case in order to confirm the identity of Albert's daughter. Therefore, Madame Grace recommended a paternity test on her own. The mercenary asked when Lady Charlotte had ordered this test to be done. After that, the girl stated that she would like to speak to the Countess immediately. Madame Grace asked the girl to calm down, for she had misunderstood everything. Kara was angry because Charlotte didn't believe that they were sisters from the beginning. The legal counselor continued to assure the mercenary that the DNA test was just a mere formality. The maid talked about how the Countess's intentions would become clear after she had negotiated the announcement. Madame Grace felt unconcerned, for earlier she had thought that Kara had come here to claim part of her inheritance. However, it became clear that the girl was staying in this place for the sake of her half-sister's acceptance. Kara ordered the servants to shut up, for she didn't want to hear any more silly excuses. Now she wanted to hear an explanation of what was happening from Countess Charlotte herself. The mercenary also added that if she was not taken to her, she would make the servants do it. The maid began to worry because the situation was getting out of control and the problem still had to be solved somehow. However, Kara could not be allowed near Charlotte if she was behaving so unpredictably. The Countess read the papers that stated that her sister was known to be an egregious mercenary. The report stated that she had grown up surrounded by mercenaries and had fought alongside one from a young age. The protagonist wasn't sure if she and her servant were talking about the same person. The black-haired 19-year-old girl with a height of 175 centimeters is quite unique. Miss Kara was 100% the mercenary that various rumors were always going on about. Based on the report, this girl had recently contacted Albert. The Countess was curious to know what her father was thinking at that moment. There was still a possibility that Albert had hired a mercenary to deceive his daughter and take the inheritance for himself, especially since they didn't resemble each other at all. The only thing that remained was that her appearance could have been Albert's devious plan. A girl as cheerful and sincere as her could not be from the house of Parole. To decide what to do next, a paternity test had to be done at the Enchanted Tower. The servant promised to arrange everything. The mercenary went around the mansion looking for Countess Parole. The servant, trying to protect the mistress, blocked Kara's passage because it was forbidden to enter here. The girl sharply pushed the servant aside. The man did not even have time to notice how she managed to bounce aside. Kara looked at the servant with disdain. She said that if he did anything else, in that case, he would have to wash his blood. The Countess asked Sir Mundane to leave them alone. Of course, the excited servant did not want to leave his mistress with this barbaric girl. Charlotte asked the mercenary why she had come. Kara asked the Countess not to pretend as if she didn't understand. The mercenary resented being led around by the nose all week. Charlotte genuinely didn't understand what she was talking about. Kara resented the fact that the Countess never believed that they were sisters. The mercenary thought that if the girl didn't trust her, she could have simply chased her out of the mansion. Kara didn't understand why she was being treated as kin if she was going to be discarded like some stranger in the near future. She didn't need charity in the form of food and shelter. The Countess argued that a decision should be made based on facts, not just faith. The mercenary could not tolerate Charlotte because of her ruthless words. Even though the Countess was small and wealthy, it gave her absolutely no right to control other people. Enraged, Kara tore Lady Charlotte's dress. The girl's body was covered with deep scars. The Countess asked to postpone the conversation until the evening, because now she wanted to be alone. Kara began to ask the girl how she got those scars. Instead of explaining, however, the Countess ordered her half-sister out of her chambers. The mercenary had never seen a noble woman with such scars before. It was becoming increasingly difficult for the girl to understand what was really going on in this place. The maid told Kara that her dinner on the lower floor was ready. When the mercenary turned to look at the girl suddenly shuddered in fear. Kara couldn't understand what was going on with this maid all the time. During dinner, the mercenary started apologizing for crossing the line today. Charlotte didn't want to say anything back. The chef of House Parole was very serious about his long-time commitment to serve only first-class dishes. Unfortunately, the Countess had never been a fan of fine dining. She hardly ever touched her food. She always took just a few bites from the dishes served, as she didn't eat for flavor, but to survive. But somehow the chef's savior arrived, namely a girl who idolizes absolutely every dish he prepared. He was so happy to be recognized. However, his happiness was about to crumble. The chef couldn't understand why there was such a depressing atmosphere during dinner. The chef was about to present his dishes, but the Countess interrupted him, asking him to bring a bottle of Sauvignon and a cheese platter. The chef was outraged by this news, as he had spent all day today at the stove. The man looked pleadingly at Kara. The mercenary asked her sister to forgive her, for she was too busy with herself. She couldn't imagine why the Countess would let all those beautiful dishes go to waste. Charlotte irritably repeated that she wanted cheese and wine. Kara didn't understand why the Countess was mad at the chef if he spent all his free time cooking. Annoyed, the Countess asked her half-sister if she could keep quiet for a while. The mercenary, who couldn't stand the fact that they were trying to shut her mouth, started snapping at her mistress. Kara asked Charlotte if she really planned on drinking with her. A rather odd question considering that just moments ago the Countess had asked for a bottle of alcohol to be brought to her. The mercenary suddenly suggested that her half-sister take the bottle with her and follow her. Kara wanted to head to the room. for there were too many extra eyes here. Moreover, Charlotte would be able to change into more comfortable clothes so as not to spoil her beautiful dress. The Countess didn't quite like the idea, for she had never had a drink in her chambers before. The mercenary asked her to trust her. Charlotte did not even move to put on her dress. Kara was annoyed by this, but she tried to feign indifference. Unfortunately, the wine from the Count's cellar was not very tasty. Nevertheless, the Countess continued to sip it like water. But it seemed that considering the amount she had drunk, Charlotte was quite all right. The mercenary hoped her half-sister didn't have a dangerous addiction to alcohol. Grafina had told Kara that even though she was tall, she had absolutely no right to look down on people. The mercenary genuinely didn't understand what her interlocutor was getting at. Kara said that it was time to go upstairs because Charlotte was drunk. The girl refused because now, in her opinion, was the time to stop condescending to her. The mercenary asked her sister the same thing. Charlotte liked being a countess, but she should not point out her privileges to everyone. The girl said she had no choice, for that was the only criteria for which she was truly feared and respected. It seemed that the Countess was like a cold glass doll. In fact, Lady Charlotte had a lot of things. The girl had inherited great wealth from her grandfather, including the largest estates in the kingdom of Athol. The Countess admitted that material possessions meant absolutely nothing to her. Kara couldn't even guess that her sister inside would turn out to be just like the other girls. Unexpectedly, Kara asked her older sister how she got those horrible scars. Then the girl confessed that they were left by her mother. The mercenary asked in surprise if her mother was here. The Countess told her that, thanks to her grandfather's will, she had been sent to her family. Charlotte was indifferent to the woman, but Kara wondered how she could be let off so easily after all she had done. Kara promised that if she learned the whereabouts of Charlotte's mother, she would make her kneel before her. The Countess, who thought this was began to laugh. Charlotte said that since they were talking about the past, Kara Lilestorm could share some of her personal information as well. Fortunately, the girl had no reason to hide her past from anyone. Since childhood, Kara had had to live as a mercenary, as she simply had no other choice. Her mother had abandoned her in the mercenary guild when she was just a young girl. Fortunately, she had enough talents to survive in this harsh and thankless world. Charlotte remembered the woman with whom Albert had come to her mansion. But her father had said that the mother had raised her daughter in the shadows. To clear up the misunderstanding, the Countess asked her sister if Albert had raised her. Kara then admitted that her father had not even remembered her existence until recently. Charlotte had previously speculated that her sister had actually been raised in love. The mercenary assumed that the Countess had been treating her coldly all this time because of jealousy. Kara was glad to those people for the fact that she managed to find herself here. The girl wanted to receive the whole share of the inheritance and then give it back in order to look at the faces of her parents, covered with terrible horror. The Countess was surprised that the mercenary was going to give everything, because earlier she assumed that her sister came here solely for profit. After the death of her grandfather, Charlotte had to fight off her parents to keep the title and inheritance she had received. She could not give it all away so easily, because all these riches belonged exclusively to her. When the Countess first saw her sister, she thought that the girl had come here to take away her money. Kara told her interlocutor to forget about what she said, because the meaning of life is not only in wealth. After that, the mercenary said that today they were celebrating. The drunken girls continued to party. Kara was teasing Charlotte for drinking so much alcohol. The mercenary didn't like that her sister's arm was so thin, like a twig of a tree. The Countess justified her low weight by saying that noble ladies should always be slender and beautiful. But Kara said that surely there was no noblewoman in their kingdom who was so thin. Charlotte was embarrassed to answer the question of why she ate so little. Her mother had never allowed the girl to have her first debut ball or attend other social events. Those memories had caused the girl unbearable homesickness before, but now that she was spending time with Kara, her mood had begun to improve considerably. The mercenary convinced her half-sister that she should enjoy every part of her body, for it was beautiful. Kara woke up in her half-sister's chambers. As it turned out, the Countess had spent the night on the table, and from the looks of it, she hadn't quite sobered up from last night's drinking. Charlotte's face turned grim as she noticed the table right in front of her. While the girl was trying to regain her senses, her sister continued to laugh about all sorts of silly things. The Countess was angered by Kara's comments about her hair. She wouldn't have made such a mockery if she herself had grown curly hair. The mercenary asked Charlotte why she didn't just cut her hair if her curly locks caused her so much inconvenience in her daily life. The Countess already had many regrets from yesterday. The girls seemed to misunderstand each other from the start. Charlotte apologized to her sister for being so rude in the beginning. Kara was not offended, for considering that she was brought here by Albert, the girl had every right to be considerate. It is most unfortunate that children can't beat out their parents. Because of her unscrupulous father, Charlotte had trusted no one throughout her life. The girl always looked back because she was afraid of getting a knife in the back. But Kara was different. The Countess believed the mercenary and wanted her to be a part of her life. Charlotte said she needed to meet with Madame Grace to help her put Kara's name on the register of peers of Athol. Such news quite shocked the young mercenary. The mistress of the manor said that since they were sisters, there was nothing wrong with sharing the same surname. Especially, even if they start the procedure now, they would have to wait about 3 months to finalize everything. Kara had asked her sister for the benefit of not rushing things. The mercenary appreciated Charlotte's attention, but a new life would prove too difficult for her. She didn't want to waste her time on etiquette, various duties, and so on. The girl wanted to return to the life of a free mercenary. The Countess said that she did not want to force her sister to sacrifice anything. Kara asked Charlotte not to make any mistakes. Kara argued that she didn't deserve such a life, but her sister wouldn't be deterred. One shouldn't be ashamed of what one is given by birthright. Especially if the mercenary left her sister, Albert might soon return and cause even more trouble for their dysfunctional family. Kara agreed that her sister's words made some sense, but the mercenary still knew she would feel guilty for all the wealth she had gained. Charlotte, who had spent her entire life living an aristocratic life, was far more deserving of such boons. Noticing her sister's sad face, Kara said that perhaps she should consider the offer better. Of course, she would look into it if Charlotte would allow her to stay at her estate for a few more days. From that day forward, the two sisters began to share every bit of their lives with each other. The girls were learning to show real concern. For example, Kara was very worried about her sister's health. The girl forced Charlotte to eat, arguing that the other noblewomen would laugh at her thinness. The Countess had no choice but to obediently open her mouth and let her sister feed her. In other words, a rather close relationship had developed between the two of them. They started every morning with minor hassles. But despite their differences, the girls were confident that they would manage to live a long and happy life together. Kara and Charlotte loved to gossip every night, as sisters usually do. Time flew by quickly when they were together. They had many interesting stories from completely different worlds. They were never bored. It had a particularly good effect on Charlotte, and today they ventured out in public together for the first time. The young worker greeted the visitors to the atelier. The young man said that, unfortunately, their store did not have suitable clothes for the honorable lady's maid. Kara immediately attacked the unsuspecting atelier employee with accusations. The Countess dumped a handful of gold coins on the table. Charlotte was very upset that on their first shopping trip together, her dear sister had insisted on going to a men's boutique. If it were up to the Countess directly, she would have bought Kara the most expensive lace dress from the best Athol designers. At the moment, however, the girl had no intention of discussing her style. The employee began to apologize for his disrespectfulness. The young man said that their boutique did not have the right sizes, but after a few gold coins, he immediately went in search of suitable clothes. The Countess ordered the startled servants to hurry up, for they had too many more important things to do. Charlotte asked to involve all the tailors who work in this atelier. Kara marveled at her sister's actions. The Countess said that it was nothing, because she wanted the girl to have only the best. The mistress of the estate was no longer lonely. Now she had someone to rely on, and those around her were happy to see this change. All this was made possible thanks to Kara. A new chapter of the Parole family had begun. Charlotte asked her sister why she wore pants if they weren't even the best quality. Since Kara worked as a mercenary, she had no need for expensive clothes. The Countess asked her sister if she had ever worn dresses. Kara found the question ridiculous, since it was unlikely that anyone in her profession would ever wear such clothes. Fair enough, but it bothered Charlotte that other than shirts and pants, she no longer had any clothes at all. That problem had to be fixed somehow. Despite her sister's protests, the Duchess wanted to minimize the amount of male clothing in Kara's chambers. The girl asked the butler to prepare a carriage for the trip because they were going shopping in the city. Hubert was very surprised by such news, before the Countess did not like to appear in public. Kara protested because she did not like heat, long walks, and shopping. She was much more interested in eating goodies and relaxing, but her older sister had seriously set herself up for a trip to the city. The butler understood Lady Kara's concern, but the girl was obliged to go with the Countess. To somehow interest the mercenary, Hubert said that a new barbecue restaurant had opened in the city not long ago. The servant claimed that according to the critics, one could even die for that food. Kara wouldn't be able to resist such an obvious temptation. The mercenary told her sister to pack her things, for right now they were heading for the city. The Countess didn't understand where the girl's sudden hunger came from if they had eaten not too long ago. Many people in Athol were interested in the sudden appearance of the new Countess Charlotte Brabant de Parole. Since she rarely left the estate, people had to rely on the stories told by her tutors in her studies. Many believed that the young Countess possessed unearthly beauty. Count Parole had long kept his granddaughter from the eyes of strangers. Someone assumed that Charlotte is an angel who descended to earth for the sake of blessing the inhabitants of this country. People heard millions of different stories extolling her beauty. The Countess was undoubtedly the idol of young ladies in high society, but all these stories also gave rise to dark gossip. Someone believed that all the stories about Charlotte's beauty were just ordinary gossip. Although the girl's father was a famous, handsome man, there must be a reason why her mother refused to host her own daughter's debut ball. The nefarious ladies speculated about the fact that the girl might not have been pretty, and that is why the family is trying to hide her from the eyes of others. Charlotte interested everyone in the capital. The Countess began to buy up absolutely all expensive goods in elite stores. The rumor about their little shopping immediately spread around the capital, and the appearance of the Parole sisters surprised everyone in Athol. Kara asked Charlotte if she had some sort of alias. The mercenary offered to call her Charlie. The Countess seemed to like that nickname. Inspired by the idea, Kara began to speculate about what nickname she might adopt for herself. The Countess said her sister didn't need a nickname, as her name was already too short. Parole Manor was filled with warmth and laughter unlike the days before, and everyone believed that happiness would last forever. Until one day, a letter arrived that changed absolutely everything. The young man greeted his dear brother with a smile on his face. The Duke of Cardiff bowed before His Majesty. The nobleman was glad that his master was in good health. His Majesty found these words very flattering and touching. Athol is eternally grateful to the Duke of Cardiff for his valiant service on the border. Without him, the Northmen would have sacked the entire kingdom. So Arthur has once again returned from the battlefield unharmed. His Majesty had been told earlier that the northern barbarians were very cunning in battle. The young man believed that he would be lucky next time. His Majesty said that in Cardiff's absence, rumors from high society had reached him that he had doubts in the first place about this expedition. The Duke objected, saying that he lived to serve the king and the kingdom of Athol. His Majesty was well aware of this, so no one doubted his loyalty during the retreat of Cardiff. The king promised to punish all those nobles who dared to spread slander. After all, the Duke lived to serve him. However, today, the king did not call his subordinate to exchange pleasantries. There was a problem, and so His Majesty needed help. The Duke agreed, even though he realized that he would be dragged into more trouble. The king asked Scar to step forward and drop the pointless theatrics. His Majesty asked if Charlotte posed a threat to his plan. If Albert was to be believed, the girl was quite harmless. She wouldn't have the willpower to rule the entire House of Parole. The king said he wanted the Duke to take the matter personally. The Parole family has one of the largest diamond mines in the kingdom, and the only one standing between the king and what he wants is a young lady who not long ago became a countess. His Majesty needed those diamonds. Theron's greed knew no bounds. It was hard to believe that a ruler could plot against his subjects in such a way, for such behavior was absolutely unacceptable for a king. When the Duke was reunited with his beloved, he saw a small child in her arms. His name was Theron, the future King Ramsay IV. But despite all these difficulties and misfortunes, the Earl was over the moon with happiness, because Elizabeth returned to him. And soon another child appeared in the Cardiff family, the true heir to the House of Cardiff, Arthur. The Duke did not see Theron as a threat. as in the Mad King Uther, imprisoned for life. The half-brothers grew up surrounded by the care and love of the Duchess of Cardiff. Theron and Arthur adored each other. They knew nothing as children about their tangled past, until one tragic day tore their fates apart. Tragedy lurks in every corner of our lives. It waits silently in the shadows, anticipating its prey, and it will devour you when you least expect it. The girls whispered excitedly behind the Duke of Cardiff's back. He looked like a dream boy. One of the girls offered to approach and introduce herself, but the other stopped her, arguing that this young man only exchanges common greetings with noble ladies. Arthur Cardiff is the sole heir to the House of Cardiff. The title went to him at the age of 11 after his father's sudden death. The Earl of Cardiff was known as a virtuous man of unrivaled courage, and Arthur's mother, the Duchess of Cardiff, was nicknamed the Flower of Athol for her incredible beauty. This perfect couple were adored by the whole nation, but in an instant their promising life was marred. One morning, after her husband had crossed the threshold of the royal palace, Lady Cardiff received the most ominous of letters. From the letter it followed that the Duke was arrested by order of King Uther and will be able to go free only on one condition. To save her husband, the girl had to give herself to His Majesty. The king asked his beloved to make the right choice. Blinded by love, King Uther went to extreme lengths to possess her. The Duchess had no choice but to bend to his will. But on her return, she forced the king to let the Duke of Cardiff go. The king agreed, even though he knew that the Duke would soon return for his beloved. As proof, 3 years later, he besieged the capital. Hans complained to His Majesty. The Duke did not understand what this thug could be doing in the palace. His Majesty asked Hans to explain how he had screwed up. The man said that the original plan was for them to take control of House Parole, since Albert is not in a position to do so. Hans had recently learned that the last Count Parole had left behind him an unbreakable will. All of his inheritance went to Lady Charlotte, not Albert. The Duke could not understand what they were talking about. The young man assumed that the king wanted to take over the House of Parole. Hans's original plan was just perfect. First, he needed to get Albert into huge debts. Secondly, he had to interest the man with an unexpected but very pleasant offer. And at the end, Albert had to make a decision. But it was Hans's own fault for trusting the late Count's son. The thug asked His Majesty for forgiveness because he did not expect that the head of the House of Parole would leave his child with empty pockets. Hans was anxious to rectify his mistake. Ramsay IV had already decided to strip House Parole of its entire fortune. He will get whatever he wants since the Countess has no way out. If that's the case, the Duke will have to find a peaceful plan to resolve the situation. If he were another nobleman, he would undoubtedly dare to spit in the king's face. But Arthur could not disobey as long as His Majesty had complete control over him. Brandon Russell, the commander of the capital's guards, told the Duke that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. The young man asked Arthur if he had finally decided to make peace with the king. The Duke admitted that it was not an easy task to accomplish. The commander of the guards hugged his friend because he was glad to see him anyway. Brandon asked Arthur what His Majesty wanted this time. In short, Theron wants House Parole to lose all its privileges. Many nobles are on the waiting list for titles and estates, but there are no suitable lands in the county. If the king is unable to meet the needs of his subjects, his competence is under a big question mark. But to the king, Charlotte is useless. If the countess withdraws, he will be able to give her title to the highest bidder. In doing so, he will be able to use the vast assets of the Parole family as he pleases. When the king gave this cruel commission, the Duke had a great idea in his head, and to realize it, he needed Brandon's help. He's one of Theron's favorite commanders-in-chief. If everything goes according to plan, this battle will end well. The Duke asked his friend to do a small favor. Of course, the commander of the guards was willing to do a great deal. Arthur said that Brandon should get married. Lady Charlotte received a letter from the palace. The Countess felt that this letter was definitely not good. Cara asked her sister what was wrong. Charlotte said a letter had arrived from Ramsay IV. It said that the king was very saddened by the news that the head of House Parole, one of his most loyal subjects, had not yet given a ball and was still looking for a suitor. His Majesty therefore graciously grants Rosenhall to Charlotte Brevant de Parole and the pride of Athol, Brandon Russell. Sir Brandon Russell was the pride of Athol. He began his career as a foot soldier, but soon won many brilliant victories for the kingdom. and His Majesty gave him the rank of Commander of the Capital Guard as a reward. He's the hottest man in Athol. Kara had even seen his biography in a bookstore. The mercenary couldn't tell Charlotte that she had bought the book, but his story was mesmerizing. Sir Russell is the commander of the Capital Guard and a favorite of King Ramsay, but even the powerful king couldn't give Sir Russell the title because there are no vacancies in Athol's noble hierarchy. And on the other side, there is Charlotte, a worthy bachelor with a title. And Rosen Hall is the venue for royal wedding ceremonies, which means King Ramsay is prepared to accept this as a state marriage. So His Majesty was proposing a marriage of convenience. Kara was outraged that the king was willing to sacrifice her sister for his favorite tame puppy to be given the title of Earl. Charlotte told the girl not to worry, as everything was fine. However, Kara thought her sister should be as furious as she was. However, that wasn't the only marriage proposal Charlotte had received. Ever since her grandfather died, the number of proposals had increased, due to the opinion that the countess was an easy target. Sir Mundane had advised his mistress not to leave his domain after several attempts to kidnap the girl had been uncovered. A sharp realization came to the mercenary as to the true reason her sister had not left the palace. Previously, Kara had believed that Charlotte was just an ordinary closeted loner who hated the world. Her sister had hoped that the countess would reject this suggestion. However, Charlotte could not refuse so easily, because it was a request from King Ramsay himself. He would not leave the girl until Sir Russell found the countess too unattractive and rejected her of his own free will. Charlotte's hands were tied. The countess suggested that she could somehow scare the young man away. Nothing would work, however, for Lady Charlotte was too beautiful. Worse, Sir Russell would be able to fall in love with her even more, knowing that this angelic beauty secretly belonged to a down-to-earth type of girl. It was the first time Kara regretted that the god had given her sister such attractive looks. Then the mercenary suggested that she could go in her sister's place. He needs a worthy bachelorette from House Parole, so it would be a good idea to replace the countess for a while. And even if Kara got caught, she could say that she did so because her sister was ill. The girl belonged to that family anyway. Kara would show him the worst, most disgusting behavior mankind had ever seen. Sir Russell would not be easy to get rid of. The title, the wealth, the fame. He'll get it all if he marries Charlotte. On top of that, he's a favorite of the king. But Kara must thwart his intentions. Tonight, she'll end this handsome man, and he'll think twice about his indifference to the countess. Sir Russell, however, turned out to be gorgeous. Kara fell in love at first sight, and he too. The young man realized that this girl is definitely his type. It was hard to believe it, but they fell for each other. Kara said that she was very hungry, so boiled herbal water, that is tea, would not fix the situation. The girl declared that she needed a hot and thick meal. Sir Russell enthusiastically agreed that tea would not be enough. The worker thought about showing the guests to the nearest restaurant. However, the establishment worker allowed that it could have been a check from His Majesty. He surely had to fulfill all the king's expectations. Sir Russell had something to say. However, Kara mesmerized him with her beauty. He had never seen a noblewoman enjoy a meal as much as she did. The young man was grateful to Arthur for setting him up with a true angel who had fallen from heaven. It seemed to the mercenary as if her interlocutor was like a predator enjoying its prey. He was definitely not like the whining nobles Kara had dealt with before. Sir Russell seemed so insane. The young man asked the lady if she would like something to drink. The employee of the establishment expected that the girl would want something of a strong drink, such as wine. However, Kara said that she would like a cold beer. Sir Russell thought it was fate, because he also liked this drink very much. It seemed as if this girl was absolutely perfect. The young man suggested that they go together to a good pub, which was just down the street. The girl was very excited, for there was nothing better than a beer in such sizzling heat. Of course, wine was also a good option, but Kara was tired of it after her daily drinking with her sister. The next day, the girl's head was bursting with a hangover. She couldn't even remember how she'd gotten home last night. Charlie would probably kill her, since she hadn't even changed into her home clothes after meeting Sir Russell last night. Alcohol was definitely worth quitting for a while. The girl began to think back on what had happened last night. Kara was clearly going to be in trouble, because the plan had gone completely off track. Throughout the day, Russell behaved too strangely. The young man came to his senses only after His Majesty shouted his name. The king asked Sir Russell to tell what happened at yesterday's meeting with Countess Charlotte de Parole. After the young man had guided Kara home, he could think of nothing but her. Everywhere Brandon looked, her beautiful face appeared. This lady had bewitched his heart and soul. One of His Majesty's servants asked why the Countess Charlotte would want to date such a rude man. The lad asked indignantly about what the king had done behind his back. His Majesty then admitted that he had done Sir Russell a favor and introduced him to the Countess. The king had always had a soft spot for Brandon, but involving House Parole was a very drastic step. The nobleman inquired how His Majesty had managed to arrange a meeting with Lady Parole. This girl was the most popular celebrity in high society in recent times. She adorned Athol with her beauty. The young man was pleased to watch his companion enjoying the meal. Kara said that it was wonderful, but Sir Russell did not need to observe the formalities of conversation. The young man couldn't believe that he was spending time with such a lovely lady. Kara found the guy quite attractive as well. The girl declared that it was time to move on to the next pub. Sir Russell was to follow anywhere this beautiful lady went. The king asked Brandon if it would be a problem for him to give more details about last night. Everyone present was certain that something had definitely happened during their meeting. The nobleman recalled an incident where Sir Russell had choked in front of a lady after she handed him a handkerchief. The embarrassed young man desperately tried to justify himself. As a warrior and commander, Brandon had spent most of his life on the battlefield. His devotion to his country limited the chances of a romantic relationship. The young lady stepped forward to show him her appreciation. He stood like a frozen man for a long time. No one expected Brandon could fall in love so easily. The king had been told of the beauty many times, but no one had seen her up close, so the rumors remained unconfirmed. The nobleman said that this information had stopped being a rumor long ago. Just recently, Countess Parole suddenly appeared in the capital. She bought up all the best clothes and the most expensive jewelry in expensive boutiques. Lady Parole has become the most talked about noblewoman in high society. She must be making an incredible impression on everyone. However, the conversation between the young men came to a standstill when it turned out that Brandon met with a brunette, while rumors suggest that the young lady is a blonde. Charlotte confessed that she had always dreamed of writing a children's novel, a story about magic, princesses, and dragons. Kara asked where her sister had gotten the idea. The girl confessed that when she was very young, her mother once read her a fairy tale. This so-called mother once made a gift, which was a book of children's fairy tales. Charlotte later learned that her mother had only done this to make herself look good in front of others while she was renegotiating the property division agreement with Albert for divorce. But for the Countess, it was the first gift she had ever received from her parents. Charlotte confessed that she had always enjoyed reading about magic, but unfortunately, such stories are hard to find. Tales of great mages are long gone. Kara asked her sister why she shouldn't try to publish her own book. If this was truly her life's dream, then that meant it was something she should pursue, especially since the Countess had more than enough connections to accomplish such a thing. It was time for the girl to pursue her own happiness. Charlotte was grateful to her sister for making her fulfill her own dreams. The Countess knocked on Kara's door and asked if she was awake. The girl did not answer, but the maid was certain that the lady had not left her room anywhere. Charlotte thought she must have dozed off. However, thoughts also crept into the Countess's mind that perhaps her sister was ill. Charlotte knocked and entered the chambers. Fortunately, the girl was fine. However, one could tell from her appearance that she was feeling very puzzled at that moment. The Countess asked her sister why she had been acting so strange lately. Charlotte inquired that it might be worth getting a doctor if her sister was having trouble feeling well. The girl suggested that something terrible might have happened during her date with Sir Russell. Smiling, Kara said that something good had happened, for she had fallen in love with the young man at first sight and then given her body and soul to him. However, those words were fantasy, because if the mercenary really told her sister that, she would be locked up in the mansion forever and never let out again. Charlotte thought her sister was very ashamed of what she had done in front of Sir Russell. The Countess had said that it was not Kara's fault, as she was not originally supposed to deal with other people's problems. The mercenary was very afraid to admit that everything had actually gone very smoothly. Moreover, the girl wanted to see again that young man who was able to capture a piece of her soul so easily. When it came to romance, Kara never believed in a happy accident. But fate had brought her together with Sir Russell, and that definitely meant something. The girl regretted lying to him, for even the king was involved in the affair. Her mind told Kara that she should not love him, but her heart wanted to do the opposite. The mercenary was afraid to know what Charlotte would think of her if she happened to find out what had happened. Meanwhile, the countess looked at her sister's disappointed face and thought about the fact that she should not have been involved in this story. Kara realized that she had to confess, because there was no other solution to the problem. All she had to do was tell Charlotte what had happened that day. Kara must confess her love for Brandon Russell. The mercenary asked her sister how she would act if she heard the truth that would disappoint her. The countess answered her sister that she should be true to herself in any case. However, Kara feared that she would hurt her sister because of her own selfish desires. Charlotte said that the girl shouldn't think about that and instead follow her heart. Kara was genuinely happy that there was a family where she was loved. Everything would be fine as long as she had her sister's reliable support. The girl promised herself that she would meet Brandon again and confess her feelings to him sincerely. The mercenary asked Charlotte if she had any dreams. The countess found it difficult to answer, for she had never pondered the question before. Kara suggested that her pompous sister's only dream was to become a countess. Charlotte said resentfully that she simply never had time to think of any desires. The butler announced that a letter had arrived from the palace. The countess asked for it to be burned. Kara told her sister that the letter should definitely be read, for perhaps the king would want to apologize for asking her to go on a date. However, in the letter, Brandon Russell asked Charlotte for an audience at the Hebron Labyrinth in 4 days. Charlotte laughed, for apparently the young man had asked His Majesty for another date. Apparently, Kara's lesson had not been enough for Sir Russell. Or maybe this young man is so desperate to become an earl that he's willing to go to extreme measures. Kara was overjoyed when she found out that Brandon also wanted to see her. A faint smile appeared on the girl's face. Justifying herself, the mercenary said that she was glad for the opportunity to break this guy down again. Besides, the maze of Hebron was quite a fun place. Charlotte hoped that this arrogant young man didn't think there was anything between them. It would be glorious if he got lost in the maze and then starved to death. The countess even suggested to her sister to get this young man into the farthest corner and then run away. Even Kara found such measures against an obsessive suitor unreasonably cruel. The mercenary had meant that a refined nobleman like Charlotte would have been able to pick up on the hints immediately. But Sir Russell was a knight, and such people are much better perceived straightforwardness. If Kara left him, the young man might think that he was being flirted with. The girl said to give her another chance, because she could definitely deal with him next time. Charlotte said that in that case, she trusts her sister completely. However, as she left the room, the countess noticed her sister kissing the letter that had been sent. Kara's outfit today was simply marvelous. The servants were very proud of the work done, because the lady looked like a real exotic flower. Hearing a huge number of compliments from the servants, the girl began to embarrassedly adjust her dress. She hoped that Sir Russell could properly appreciate her appearance. As soon as Kara left, Charlotte suggested that her servant follow her to make sure that everything would go smoothly during the meeting. Sir Mundane couldn't understand why they would want to do such a thing. The countess smugly declared that Kara would not be able to see anyone today except the young man she had gone out with. Charlotte's sister surreptitiously kissed Sir Russell's letter. The countess wanted to ask Kara about it, but she started avoiding her for some reason. So there was only one way to find out how she really felt about that man. Sir Modane still couldn't understand why the mercenary was so easily accepted into the parole family. It seemed to the servant that his mistress had some secret motives. Not long ago, Charlotte had asked Madame Grace for help. The countess wanted Kara to be officially made part of the parole house. After this request, Madame Grace did her best to fulfill her mistress's wish. And with that, Kara became Lady Kara, entitled to inherit the fortune of the late Count Parole. Unfortunately, this meant that her mother was also given certain privileges. The servant could not understand how his mistress could so easily give up her inheritance, for which she had to fight everyone in the house. Sir Modane asked the countess once more if she was ready to accept Kara as her own sister. In the end, the girl never obliged to take a paternity test. But Charlotte declared that it was enough for her that her heart accepted the girl as a sister. The servant thought her mistress too stubborn. The countess said that she appreciated all that he and the other servants had done for her. Their kindness and generosity had always helped Charlotte stay strong. Without their help, she probably wouldn't have been able to survive her parents' cruelty. But the girl also wanted the servants not to think of her as a child in trouble. Even though her grandfather had died, she still had so many other people who continued to love and care for her. That was enough for Charlotte to feel happy.